Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast. I'm continuing my series of conversations with my friend Carl Smith about coaching mindset and how to invite people into a coaching conversation. So welcome back, Carl.
It's good to be back. Good to be back.
Good to have you here again. So we're going to talk today, and we talked previously about the coaching mindset and the idea of getting yourself out of the way and positioning the coaching conversation to invite another person into the conversation. That's the context we're talking about. We talked about the difference between coaching and discipline, meaning that discipline is do it or else. Coaching is how can I come alongside you? How can I help you achieve? How can I help you get what we both need to get out of this together? That kind of inviting, encouraging, helping the other person solve the problem kind of mindset. And what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to talk about using the DISC model as the framework. We have other episodes about this. If you want to know about the DISC model and you haven't heard those episodes, you can go to discpersonalitytesting.com. We have a blog there. We have a bunch of resources there. So we're not going to go into the DISC model here. I'm just going to use it as a frame of reference. Let's talk about perspectives around people who have dominant traits. In the language of the DISC model, dominant trait, fast-paced or outgoing perspective, and a task orientation. So tends to have a results-oriented, solve the problem kind of natural mindset and action-oriented perspective. And of the two of us, I happen to have the greatest amount of dominant traits. So I'll speak from the perspective of if you are the person who has dominant traits, how do you get in your own way? And then Carl is going to say, okay, now what does he have to do when he's coaching a person with dominant traits? So what we're going to attempt to do in this brief episode here is look briefly at both sides of the coaching conversation. What does a person who's in the coaching seat who has dominant traits need to do to control themselves and get themselves in the right mindset? And if you're coaching a person who has dominant traits, what do you need to think about to invite them into the conversation? All right, so let me just start with person with dominant traits. Remember, they're driven by results and action and making things happen. And while that's not my strongest trait, it's a strong enough trait in me that it does rear its ugly head when I'm in the coaching seat sometimes. And what it does for me, it causes this internal pressure to feel like I need to rush the conversation, that I feel like I need to push this to a conclusion. I can lose sight of the relationship component of coaching and get really focused on the transactional piece. It can turn into for me, the pressure internally is, can we please just wrap this up and come to a conclusion? I see this so clearly for you. Let me just tell you what the answer is. And what you should do is you should just accept it and move on it. That's the pressure that's going on inside my head. Now, what I've learned to do to attempt, probably not always perfectly. In fact, I won't even say probably not always. I'll say probably rarely perfectly. What I attempt to do is to consciously force myself to think about the impact of how I'm behaving on the relationship. So I keep reminding myself that this conversation is as much about how we each feel about the outcome, including the other person, as to what agreement we come to or what actions will take place. I recognize that the actions are important. I just work really hard to remind myself that actions aren't the only outcome from this conversation. Mm-hmm. That if I want to invite this person in the conversation and we're going to continue to work together in the future, and I'm going to engage with them in a way that doesn't cause them to feel pressured, that I have to protect and preserve the relationship as well. And so that means I have to pull back from proposing solutions. I have to pull back from trying to drive my agenda. I have to work really hard to make space for the other person to share their concern or their perspective. And when I do that well, I invariably see that it goes better. When I don't do that well, it can turn into not necessarily a yelling, screaming fight, but it does kind of turn into a battle of wills. And I haven't actually found that often turns out all that well. So I try to keep myself focused on the relationship side and realize that I need to make space for the other person to solve the problem rather than me drive the solution. And I just found out that works better. Okay, Carl, now you've also had to coach people with dominant traits.
Yes.
What have you found helps to invite them into the conversation or create a scenario where they feel less controlled or less externally pushed by you? What have you found helps?
Well, and I think it's having a clear understanding of what they want to accomplish or achieve, and starting there. For me, it's about making sure I'm very efficient, very effective in the conversation, that it's a purposeful conversation, that it's a solutions-oriented conversation. And what's interesting is a lot of the folks, in fact, I'm thinking of a person right now that I've been coaching for quite some time, extremely task-oriented person, extremely solutions-oriented. And many times I have to meet this person where this person is by constantly thinking of, okay, he's here to solve a problem. He's here to get something done. What are ways that I can open up conversation so he has more clarity on what to do in the future? And I'll say this. I think one of the things that you are so brilliant at, Guy, is you are great at asking questions. And I've learned that in working with clients, but I also have learned that as you being my coach and just asking really thoughtful questions. So I come up with my own solutions and come up with my own discoveries to begin to apply. So
is this a fair summary that, and you're coming at this from a perspective of the person who is primarily relationship driven.
Yes.
And if you have even secondary dominant traits, it's probably not a big stretch to figure out how to make it a results-focused conversation.
Yes.
So in some respects, we're probably, if we're talking to a person who doesn't have dominant traits, and how do you coach a person with dominant traits, it's probably going to be somebody similar to you in terms of the relationship focus who will have the greatest struggle with this idea.
Yeah.
What I heard you say is that you find it helpful to consciously force yourself to focus on the results. And I don't think you said this, but I think this is implied. You have to kind of set aside a desire to connect on a buddy-buddy relationship perspective.
Yep.
And you need to keep it focused on what's going to happen, what actions are going to happen as a result of this, what are the results we're achieving, and which means you kind of have to die to yourself a little bit to do this well. You have, because it sounds, I know you, and I know that the desire to connect personally is huge for you. And so I think what I heard is that you found in order to be successful coach for person with dominant traits, you kind of have to set that aside and shift your focus to action, results, efficiency. And it's interesting. It's kind of like the flip side for me. I'm saying I have to set that aside in order to be effective if I'm coaching from a dominant perspective, and I have to focus on the relationship. And you're saying in order to be successful working with person with dominant traits, I have to be willing to at least temporarily kind of set aside the desire for relationship connection and focus on the results.
Yep.
So,
Isn't that funny?
oh my gosh, so much work.
Well, and here's the secret sauce of what we're talking about, folks. It ain't about me. That's effective coaching. It's not about me. It's about how do I create the right environment for someone to really get a great experience and get more insights so they can achieve and perform and get the things that they're looking for. That's what effective coaching is.
And so what you have to do depends a bit on what your natural traits are. So like in this case, how do I get myself out of the way if I have dominant traits? is I have to set aside my desire to make this really transactional. I have to make room for the relationship. That's often true. If I'm coaching a person who has dominant traits and I have dominant traits, probably. Now, in that case, I might have to set aside my desire to control and let them have some control, which is kind of like the same thing you were saying, is I still have to get into their view. Even if I share their view, I have to figure out a way to bridge that distance so it doesn't feel too controlling to that person.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about this some more in some further episodes. We're going to talk about what does it mean to coach from an I perspective, inspiring style perspective, or what does it mean to coach a person that has inspiring traits and supportive traits and cautious traits. We're going to look at all four. And for this week and for this episode, I'm going to say, if you're coaching a person who has dominant traits, or if you have dominant traits, hopefully we shared some tips for you that help you get out of the way in that coaching conversation so that you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.